Welcome everyone to the Sports Weekly Selection Series. We have with us today school board member Carrie Douglas. Carrie, thanks for taking time out of your busy campaign schedule to be here with us today.
Thanks for taking time to provide this service to the community. Appreciate it.
Carrie, could you introduce yourself and just tell viewers, listeners, readers why you're running for this position?
Yeah, so my name is Carrie Douglas. I was born and raised in Bend and went through the Bend Pine schools myself. And I am running for a few reasons. I think I can probably say with some certainty that there has perhaps never been a more important time for strong leadership on a school board than in the middle of a pandemic. And, many school boards across the country are in chaos right now, and that is not good for their communities or kids. And our system is not in chaos. We are opening, it is going smoothly. All the stakeholders are on board. And I think a large part of that is due to my leadership as the chair of the board during this year. It has certainly not been easy. I have not come close to making everyone happy, but I have worked really hard to work across my 6 individually elected colleagues, the superintendent, the 2 unions, and our parents and students who all have very different opinions about this year. And so I think in this time, as we are emerging from the pandemic, hopefully, and onboarding a new superintendent, it's really important to keep some strong, consistent leadership on the board. 3 of my colleagues have chosen not to run again. And so we know we're going to have at least 3 new members on the board, which is a big deal. And I didn't want to make that 4. And I think I'm uniquely qualified to lead in this time for a couple of reasons, and we'll also tell you a little bit about my background in doing that. So first and foremost, I'm a mom of 2 kids, and like every parent or caregiver in our community, I want the very best for my kids. I am a small business owner and employer here in Central Oregon. My husband and I own 2 small businesses. And I also have an MBA, and so I bring experience in business and finance, which is both an important perspective to have on the board as a local employer, and also really critical when you're managing a multi-$100 million budget, and unfortunately likely dealing with some tough budget decisions coming up this year. I am a long career, really educator. I started out as a teacher. I've been a school leader. I've worked in the central office of 2 large districts, and I've led 2 national nonprofits, and have had the great privilege of traveling the country and visiting hundreds of schools in cities around the country, and really seeing the best and worst of what our public education system in America has to offer. And so I'm able to bring that exposure and ideas and learnings from around the country to our community. If reelected, I'll be the longest serving board member on the board with 4 years of experience. If I'm not reelected, the longest serving board members will have 2 years of experience. And I've sort of geeked out on school board governance. It is a really unique role. You are not the CEO. You are not even part of a collective board like a nonprofit. You're an individually elected steward of the community. And so I've spent a lot of time studying effective board governance and bring that to the board as well. So in addition to 40 years of community building and partnership building across diverse stakeholders in Bend. So a little bit about me and why I'm running and why I think I should be reelected.
Thanks so much. So we'll cover some of the things you talked about again in our questions, but just to start off, I want to ask a pretty broad question. What's your biggest concern right now for students in the Bend Pine Schools district?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a pretty easy answer right now. I am concerned about the impact of this pandemic on their mental, emotional, and physical health and on their academics. And our country, certainly our school system, has never reckoned with the type of learning loss and widespread trauma that we expect to deal with. I think the good news is that our teachers are trained to come back every fall and deal with some learning loss and deal with students who experience, a diversity of experiences during the school year. And so they are not, unprepared to deal with the types of learning loss and, growing achievement gaps and mental and emotional health, but certainly not at the scale and at a time when I fear, our state may have decreased tax revenue and perhaps not as much money as we were hoping. And so that is what keeps me up at night.
Carrie, you've served now for 4 years. What makes a good school board member, in your opinion? What should people be looking for in this position?
That is an excellent question. I think a few things. One is that you have to recognize that you are one of 7. And you have to be prepared and willing to work collaboratively with people that you may or may not agree with. That you sit in a really specific position. As I said, you are not the CEO and should not be making decisions as the CEO. That is the superintendent. And so, you're looking for a school board member who understands that your role is to set goals, to evaluate the superintendent, to manage the budget, to write policy, but not to micromanage or really to tell the superintendent how to get to those goals. And so you have to bring knowledge and skills to the table, but not an overinflated sense of what your role is, or the idea that you're just going to come in and tell the superintendent or system how to do things. That's an inappropriate use of board power and doesn't work well. I think, a big role of being on the school board is as a community conduit, someone who is responsible for kind of two-way communication. And so certainly someone who has, relationships and partnerships across the community and is able to talk to diverse stakeholders, both bringing them into the conversation, hearing their feedback, and communicating out so that the community understands what the district is going through. So a combination of skills, knowledge, humility, growth mindset, willingness to learn, collaborative, some of the top things I would look for.
Thanks. So as you know, the legislature is poised to pass a bill that allows local governments the option to ban people with concealed carry permits from bringing firearms into public buildings. Do you believe that the schools in the district office of Ben Lopine Schools should be gun-free zones with anyone who has a concealed weapon permit required to check those at the door?
Yeah, so unfortunately, we all know this has become a highly politicized issue. Fortunately, I now have significant experience leading through a politicized issue because the pandemic was so politicized. And the way I approach any politicized issue is, obviously I have my own personal opinion and values, and that is partially what people elect us based on, and I'll talk about mine more in a minute. But I'm also an elected official responsible for coming to a decision for our entire community. And so I truly always take time to, even if I think I know what the answer is or what my own opinion is, to read data and research, to talk to experts on both sides of an issue, to talk to a variety of constituents, especially those who would be most impacted, not just the loudest, and then really coming to my recommendation as an elected official. And so if this bill is passed, I will begin that process of deep learning and listening before I come to a final recommendation for our community, because I think that's the right thing to do as an elected official. That being said, personally, I am married to a Navy veteran who served in the military for 14 years, and we are gun owners, and I respect an individual's right to own a gun, but I also believe in common sense gun laws and gun safety, and our primary job at the school district is to make sure that our students and staff are safe at school. And over the past week, I have begun the process of speaking with experts, including people in law enforcement. And the reality is that I have deep concerns about the safety of our students or staff if guns are present in schools. From what I have read and heard so far, there is a much higher likelihood of an accident than the likelihood that a gun would actually make students or staff safer. And I also just want to be clear that currently this bill has a fairly minor impact in our district because we already have a policy that prohibits concealed carry by students, staff, and volunteers, who are the vast majority of people in our schools every day. So this bill would be about visitors. Just to be clear, that's the only constituent that we don't currently have the ability to have a policy to restrict.
Thank you. Carrie, the legislature in March allocated $250 million for summer programs to help students catch up and gain enrichment following this year of online instruction. How do you see this, or how would you like to see this funding used in the district?
Yeah, I think that our current plan is a good one. We have allocated that funding towards 2 years worth of summer programs, so this upcoming summer and the following summer, knowing that there's going to be long-term implications of the learning loss, and that it's targeted towards the students who need it the most. So not every student has experienced the same level of learning loss. And the summer is, a really important time, an opportunity to make that up. And so I think that, using that money in that way over 2 summers and focused on students that have experienced the greatest learning loss is the current plan and is one that makes sense.
Thanks. So you were one of those to advocate pretty early on for reopening of schools. So this is a question, obviously, we're asking everyone, but it's maybe framed in that way for you. What's your overall impression of how the district handled the COVID-19 pandemic, and what might have you done differently?
How much time do we have?
Whatever it takes.
No. I mean, look, if for anyone out there who was not an elected official during this time, and has not sat in the seat making life and death decisions on behalf of tens of thousands, or in the case of the governor, millions of people, you have no idea how hard it was. And so overall, I look back and I think we made the best decisions we could at each moment in time based on the information that we had. Knowing what I know now, I think we could have and should have opened schools earlier across the state. I think, we learned as time went on that schools are not places where significant spread happens. And I believe that schools are essential for a number of reasons for, students, obviously, but also for our economy and working parents, mothers especially. And so I really, I wish that our state had prioritized opening schools over other things. All that being said, we, as soon as it came under local control, we moved to open schools to hybrid, which was the most we could do with the 6-foot rule that remained at that time. And as soon as the 6-foot rule was removed, we moved to get kids all in. We're the 5th largest district in the country, and we were the first of the 10 largest to come back in person. And so I think that speaks to the fact that we did it as fast as you can when you are this big of a system with that many students and staff. So, I think we were close to on target. If I could go back and do it again, I would have pushed even harder to get back in earlier. But I also recognize that the governor had an impossible decision to make and did the best that she could on behalf of our state as well.
Just for those who might have picked up on that, you meant 5th largest district in the state, right? Not country.
Sorry, we are the 5th largest district in the state, and we were the first of the 10 largest districts in the state to open.
Thanks for that.
Carrie, the past year has brought increased attention to the needs of people and students of color. What, if any, changes would you make or propose in the district to better meet the needs of these students?
Oh, there are many. So, our board has made it a priority to ensure that every student in Ben Lapine feels safe, physically, mentally, and emotionally, and supported to learn and thrive in our schools. And I think we have to start by listening to what our students and staff tell us about that. Do they feel safe and supported and prepared to thrive? And so we did a huge listening tour in 2019, and it's summarized in a report called the Excellence and Equity Report. We also chose to publish all of the supporting focus group conversations almost verbatim. So you can really go in and just read and listen to the experiences of students in Ben Lapine. And we specifically focused a lot of those focus groups on students of color, students who identify as LGBTQ, students with disabilities, students that speak English as a second language, et cetera. And they told us very clearly, many of the problems that the district has in serving them. So the board took some important steps based on, again, our specific role and the levers of power that we have. So we drafted a resolution acknowledging the problem and committing to a number of actions publicly. We revised our board ends, which are goals for the district, to center each one of them on equity and anti-racism. We added an executive limitation, which is one of the primary ways that we evaluate the superintendent around equity and anti-racism. We made equity and anti-racism a top priority during our superintendent search. We asked the interim superintendent to focus on diversifying her leadership team to better reflect our student population. We supported the formation of an equity cadre to address the problems highlighted in the Excellence and Equity Report. And so basically we've set the foundation. We've said clearly that we need to, where we are is not okay. We need to have a different set of measures and goals and outcomes, and gave a lot of direction to the current superintendent and the future superintendent. And now it's really up to the district to take the hard steps to get us there, because again, the board is not responsible for execution day to day. We're responsible for holding the superintendent accountable to the goals that we've set, and the measures that we've set. So there's a ton of work to do, and we have made it a priority for our next superintendent to lead with that as a top priority.
Thank you. So the school board as a whole is responsible for setting policy for the district. What, if any, policies would you want to revisit or adopt if you're reelected?
Good question. I think this aligns with kind of my overall priorities. I think we need a number of policies to be rewritten around equity and anti-racism. So, for example, a good example is our policy around how curriculum is adopted, selected and adopted. So we, ideally, I'd like us to go through a full equity audit of all of our policies. There are many, and really go through each one and identify where we can add in specific language around equity and anti-racism in order to make those policies stronger in that way. But some of the sort of areas of focus include budget, transparency, and accessibility. It's been something that I've worked on during my first term, but I think we still have a long ways to go to provide the kind of transparency and understanding that our public deserves about how we spend our money, and a clear connection between what we say our priorities and strategy are and how we spend our money. And I'd like to codify that in policy so that it outlives my board tenure. I would like to see some real strengthening of policy around staff, parent, and student voice in the district. I think the pandemic sort of exacerbated everything, but it really shined a light on the fact that we don't have good systematic ways to hear from students, staff, and parents, to hear from a diverse group of them across lots of issues rather than only the angry folks around one issue. So policies that really, again, sort of codify and cement stronger ways to hear student, staff, and parent voice. And then policies around equity and excellence. I think that our schools in Bend are good, but there's no reason they can't be the best schools in the country. And so I would like to see more policy around diversity of choice options, really codifying the idea of risk-taking and innovation in the design of future schools. And then, all of the, like I said, a full equity audit of all of our policies around equity and anti-racism.
Carrie recently helped hire a new superintendent who starts later this year. I'm wondering what your role will be in steering the district's new leader in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a couple of critical roles to play. This is the first time our district has had an external superintendent in a long, long, long time. And there are pros and cons to that. I'm really excited for him to bring, exposure to ideas from other places and kind of a fresh look at our district, but it also means that he doesn't know our community. And so one really important role is just as a liaison in helping him understand all of the different community organizations and constituents that he needs to connect with and partner with and understand. So that is one important role, being really clear about what our goals and expectations are for him and how he'll be evaluated, which we were really able to do during the interview process. And, is one of the primary reasons I re-ran, because it really sucks to be hired by one board and then come to work for a different board. That's just a really hard thing for a superintendent to do. So providing, consistent, strong messaging around our goals and expectations, and being, a connector, a community connector for him, I think are the two primary roles.
Carrie, what's your opinion on the district's policy around sex ed?
I think there's a strong state level standard or guideline around sex ed, and that our district doesn't yet meet that. So I think our district needs, we need to ensure that we are meeting that standard with fidelity, and that all students feel represented and respected in their sex education classes. So I think the good thing is we have a clear standard to try to meet, and it's up to our district to get there.
Can you just elaborate quickly about which pieces you see the district not meeting as far as state level goals?
I honestly, this is on our agenda for this next year. And so I have not dug in at the necessary level really to be able to talk in detail. From what I understand from our last review of the health curriculum and program, which was at the beginning of my last tenure about 4 years ago, it felt like it did not meet the standard around comprehensive that I read at the time. And that not all students were well represented in the sex ed curriculum and programming when we looked at it 4 years ago, and that it's time to review that again.
Okay, fair enough.
Carrie, the social media has become such a toxic place for elected officials, and certainly over the course of the pandemic, it has become even more of a place where people feel free to not really debate the issues as much as they want to tear down or attack or troll elected officials like yourself. A lot of elected officials are opting not to run in face of the increasing pressure that's coming here from this quarter. What do you see as the role of an elected official like yourself in managing the social media? I know the school board certainly took their share of unflattering discussion in that forum. How do you manage that? I mean, just personally and as an elected official, and what do you think the future holds for elected officials in this arena?
Yeah, boy, this year sucked on that front. If there's one thing I tell just everyone I talk to all the time, it's to respect elected officials, whether you agree with them or not, because we are all humans and parents and kids, and I don't know any elected official who wakes up every morning with their goal being to ruin the lives of other people. We are all doing our best. So I think it's really tragic, especially in a small, tight-knit community like Central Oregon. I was really disappointed to see the vitriol and harassment that we, and that especially I, as the chair of the board, experienced this past year. And I think it's really unfortunate because for better or worse, social media is one of the main ways that we communicate now as a society. And I really believe in transparency and trying to communicate as much as possible. And so I wanted to use Facebook to, try to communicate out to the public the decisions we were making. I spent, literally hundreds of hours answering hundreds, if not thousands, of individual questions and comments on Facebook over the past year, trying to just provide our community with the desperately needed answers that they had to really real concerns. And unfortunately, the trolls and the harassers ruined that. And I got off of social media for several months just to protect my family and my mental health. And that meant that the community lost that ability, to communicate with me as an elected official. So we've been brainstorming as a school board about how to, what are if we can't use social media, if some people ruin it for everyone, right? And we can't use social media to communicate with the community, how do we do that? Is that through a newsletter? Is it through office hours? Is it through more, community town halls? But yeah, it's a scary and sad state of affairs, and I hope everyone takes a deep reflective look after this year at what it's done to our democracy, what it does to discouraging good people to run for office. And ultimately, that bad behavior means that we can't utilize the potentially good aspects of what social media can do around communication and community.
Yeah, I
think most elected officials will eventually get off and we'll just lose that as a form of communication.
Yeah, it's always been a problem for media as well. And my hat's off to anybody who agrees to rerun after experiencing what we all saw over the course of this last year. So,
well, our next question is kind of tied to that, and knowing that you just said, okay, social media is not perhaps the place where you're communicating with the public. What responsibilities and what avenues do you use to communicate with staff and parents and the community at large? What is that place, do you believe, that the board members should be, or where that should be located and how it should be done?
Yeah, I think it's one of the primary roles of the board. I believe that schools belong to the community, and the board are the elected stewards of the schools on behalf of the community, and that we are responsible to providing good two-way communication with the community. my strong preference is to do that live as much as possible, which the pandemic has made, really hard. But I am always willing to, take one-on-one meetings, which I do hundreds of over the course of a year. As I said, I'd love to think of more systematic ways, like regular focus groups, facilitated opportunities to receive helpful two-way communication. I think, in these times, something like a town hall probably isn't super effective, but a really well facilitated, focus group or smaller experiences where someone who's skilled at facilitating that two-way communication could really help. Our board is committed moving forward, assuming our new board members are on board with this, to try to send out a newsletter before and after each board meeting with kind of layman's terms, what are we going to be talking about? Why should you care? What matters to you? And then after the board meeting, just the important stuff. What did we talk about that might matter to you? We are committed to providing full translation services. We're committed to live streaming meetings to make them more accessible so that people don't have to show up in person. And I'm really open to community ideas about how to do this effectively, because we don't want to be yelled at, but we do want to engage in thoughtful dialogue about where our city wants to see our school system go.
Well, before I ask my last question, I want to just give you an opportunity. Is there anything that we didn't discuss that you'd like to talk about or bring up for our readers?
I don't think so, other than school board is really important. We make decisions about a lot of really important topics. You've hit on a number of them, everything from guns and sex ed to racial equity, setting the priorities of our district and steering our community where it's going to be, over the next coming decades. And so these elections matter. Voter turnout is low in midterm elections. So please do your research and vote. It matters.
Okay, so my last question is, would you like to make any comment about what sets you apart from your opponent?
I don't know Maria, so I only know what I've read online. I think I would actually start with what we have in common, which is that we're both mothers. And I am certain that we both care deeply about our children. I think we have some pretty big differences. It appears that my opponent has spent most of her life in California. And actually, I don't know, I assume it was just a Freudian slip, but she actually put on her filing paperwork that her address was Bend, California, which was kind of funny. But it's fine wherever you come from. But I think in this really difficult time, having deep community relationships matters. And I've been building them for 40 years. And I don't think she's been here that long. And it seems pretty clear from what she's put out that she's a one-issue candidate, that all she cares about is reopening schools. And our schools are open, and I am committed to keeping them open. And it's never great to have a one-issue candidate on a board, but right now, again, as we're emerging from a pandemic and onboarding a new superintendent, it is not the time to have a one-issue candidate. We are going to emerge from this pandemic, and we're going to go back to talking about many other things, academics and teaching and learning and bonds and advocacy and mental health and all the other aspects of what a school board does. And we need candidates that are interested in the entire job, not just one issue.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, that is all the questions we have for you today. We just want to thank you for taking the time to be here with us and to talk with us and letting us know all about your platform. We know that running for office is never easy, and especially during a pandemic. So we just want to thank you for your service.
Appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.